Hello, we meet again. All right, we are going through Foundations of Business, Pride, Hughes, and Kapoor. Cengage is our publisher. We're going to do chapter 3 today, Global Business. Remember, as always, this is not a substitute for a proper lecture. This is not a substitute for you reading the textbook or doing any homework or practice material in the back of the textbook or on Cengage's website. All right, with that being said, we'll go through the chapters as always. For those who are playing at home, I will occasionally mention the pages that we are on and the slides. All right, with that being said, make sure you have your favorite caffeinated beverage, coffee, tea, occasional pop or soda, depending on what you're doing. What am I drinking here? That's good old-fashioned coffee. Outstanding. We're ready to go. All right. We're going to talk about the importance of international business, how those businesses might be set up, the challenges that the businesses face, identifying the facilitators internationally, some sources, and talking about trade agreements and institutions that may help businesses seek opportunities in different parts of the world. The basics for international business, and we are right into page 69. Well, the primary reason, if nothing else, is just to expand and to take advantage of opportunities that are not local. The other reason that you see trade is for what are known as absolute and comparative advantage. When we discuss absolute advantage, it simply means that one country can produce a good much easier than another country. And when we're talking about that, producing it easier or more efficient, you don't need as many resources. And we discussed that in another textbook. Primary resources of production are land, labor, and capital, the entrepreneurial spirit as well. Well, if you were trying to grow pineapples, you probably want to do it in a warm climate, someplace like Hawaii in the United States. If you happen to be living someplace near the North Pole, you're probably not going to be able to grow pineapples very easily. You could do it, but it's a lot of work. In this instance, it is simply much easier to do trade than trying to grow pineapples in a very cold climate. A comparative advantage simply refers to two businesses or two nations, and if you're producing a good or a service, it's actually less, trying to put this in a proper manner, it's less of an opportunity cost to make between the two goods. And we'll use a quick analogy that I've seen in a lot of textbooks. If you are a famous actor and you could get a commercial for $2 million, or you could spend the entire month of weekends painting your house. Well, in this case, you painting your house is costing you $2 million. You're better off making the $2 million and hiring someone for the labor, even if you are better than the company you could have hired. The opportunity cost is far too great. So in this instance, you would farm out the work. All right, exporting and importing. Quite simply, you make something and you ship it out, you're exporting. Someone else makes something and ships it to you, they are importing. In the United States, we happen to have companies that make big stuff, little stuff, and all that other stuff in between, and they ship that out. Boeing airplanes being a prime example. Importing, again, the cost of labor, the opportunity cost is a lot cheaper. It's a comparative advantage. So the U.S. tends to consume a lot of things from other countries because they have cheaper labor cost. Go into your t-shirt drawer in your house or apartment, see how many of the shirts are actually made in the United States. Probably not that many. Who do we export with? A lot of places, but in this particular chart, we are just talking about states as far as who ships out most of the goods and services. As you would imagine, Texas, California, New York, the bigger states, are leading the ways. I believe Texas exports quite a bit of natural resources. California, probably a lot of services related to tech. New York, probably financial services and so forth and so on. Balance of trade. And moving on to page 73. Everything that you ship out creates revenue for your particular nation or state. Everything that you buy from somewhere else is goods brought in, but money not coming back and circulating. So it is seen as a negative aspect, although that's a bit of a misnomer. If you export more than you import, it is a positive trade situation. If you import more than you export, then it is a trade deficit. Or trade surplus is the first example. Trade deficit, if it doesn't work in your favor in theory. A lot of countries dislike the negative or trade deficit, and we're going to get into that just a little bit. What normally happens is you don't find a lot of money moving around. Sometimes it's credit, sometimes it's good for good. In other cases, it is a lot of money moving around. When we're talking about the balance of payments, cash flows moving in and out, and or goods and services. And then you get into how that works out on the nation's balance sheets. Looking at this in a graphic format, what you can see is it does tend to move in a bit of a nice song, and they move in the same format, usually because of the economy itself in a country. I believe in this case it is the United States, and what you're looking at is when things are good, there's a lot of importing, there's a lot of exporting. When things are bad, they both drop. So there is a difference, and there is some decent sized gap in this. Is this good or bad? It's an interesting discussion. You can do some research on your own. But the question as to whether or not it is good or bad, the simple answer, it depends. All right. What is coming down the pipe? What can we anticipate? For at least most of the world, you're going to see an ever-increasing rate of trade. As the world gets smaller, highways, airline routes, so forth and so on. The world simply getting smaller and smaller, and countries will do more and more trading. As you can read, most countries actually are welcoming this. There are disadvantages, and we will have a brief discussion about that. And for the most part, many nations benefit from trade. Either you're a nation that is exporting a little bit more, that creates jobs. If you're importing, usually you're importing something that either A, you didn't have, or B, you got it cheaper somewhere else. And that leads to the possibility of some people not finding a job and need to get a job in another area. That's the downside of all of that trade. Who does what as far as trade? Canada and Western Europe, some of the largest per capita income. That means that they have more money and discretionary income, so they can do a lot of trading. Mexico and Latin America growing as far as incomes and GDP. And they're also easing the trade barriers so they can have access to capital and do a lot of trading with their neighbors, either locally or across the ocean. In Asia, they know there's a strong demand in Western style countries for this, so they're all in favor of that. Africa has a lot of natural resources, relatively young as far as disposable income, and they're going to grow exponentially. Middle East and North Africa, a little bit of political instability in some of these regions, but the prospects for long-term success are huge. Looking at the same information, slightly different graph, and we're on the bottom of 73. What you're looking at, and if you'll notice, in most of these cases, there's more importing than exporting. Now, South and Central America seems to be the exception, but in most of the other cases, and OPEC nations, you'll notice as your income goes up, you tend to want more things. You tend to want things from other countries. Again, either you don't have locally or you can find it cheaper. Moving on to slide 12. Some of the biggest trading partners for the United States. And if you are outside the U.S., you can probably look up the information on what your country does as far as trade and the largest trading partners. Many people in the United States believe that the largest trading partner is China, and it is. They'd be surprised to find out Mexico and Canada are number 2 and 3. I'm also pretty sure most people didn't think Japan would be number 4. They may think, again, maybe a few other Asian countries, but I'm sure they weren't thinking that. Something to think about when you get back to the question of whether or not trade is good. Remember, look at all those export numbers as well. A lot of people in your country are also making money by exporting things. Now, if you're a business, you come to the question of how do you get in on this little lovely game we call international trade. There are a couple of ways of doing this. We're on page 76 and going to slide 14. First thing you need to do is figure out whether or not it's even a good idea. You need to find a market, find a product, do basically a needs analysis. Does this other country need your good? Is it profitable to actually do this? And then figure out how do you enter that particular market. Like any other form of business, let's say you have a good idea. Let's see if anyone wants to buy that product or service from you. Let's see if we have customers who are willing and able financially to do so. Do we have enough resources? And we can go from there. Once you figure all that out, then you need to figure out how do I set up the network because it's in another country and you have a whole new list of problems. Do we have any trade restrictions? How do we arrange payment? Because you're going to have a different currency. Not all the time, but more than likely you're going to have a different currency and different rules and regulations. Now we get into the economical and political impact. So there's a lot of work involved, but usually there's a great reward for it. Different types of exporting methods. How do you want to get the stuff from your host country to somewhere else? And when we're discussing international markets, first thing we're looking at is different ways of actually getting those legal contracts in place to go from one place to another. Okay, let's get around to some ideas on how we're going to actually get this international trade going. One is you get just a direct quote-unquote trading company, somebody in the middle there actually taking the product and selling it in their backyard. Counter trade, as we discussed, most of the time there's money involved, but there can be a bartering system. This country wants cars, this other country wants computers, and maybe we can do something where it's just value for value. A licensing agreement. This certainly means that you loan your name to someone, they have the merchandise and they sell it. The advantage is you don't have to actually do a lot of work there. The disadvantage is someone else has your name and you're worried about the quality in your name and you want to protect, again, the goodwill you have related to your product. Your name is probably the most valuable asset. There's a lot of stories about that. What is the most valuable name to date? It's probably related to some of the bigger companies. Now, a lot of people will say Apple or Amazon or something of that nature. All true, all true. But I believe one of the best names, if you were going to do anything like licensing, is Coke. Usually, everyone knows what it is. You can just go by the red can and put the white stripe around there, and everyone knows what it is. You don't even need to put a name on it. You could get everything Coke has. You could get the bottling companies, you can get the formula, all of it. But if you don't have the name to put on the can, you're at a bit of a disadvantage, which proves how important that name is. You can have somebody else do the manufacturing in this case, which isn't a bad idea, and it's quite interesting to have them do the works. That way you're not required to build a factory. And we're on page 79 in slide 20. You can outsource a lot of that manufacturing. You don't have to split the work. You can have it mainly done somewhere else. Again, that problem is jobs are lost locally. Another thing that you can do is work with someone. This is what a joint venture is. Rather than you putting up all the money and risk, you can actually work with someone, and that way you don't have to actually carry all the load by yourself. A lot of companies do this because it's just so much easier. Advantages, it's usually a little quicker. You reduce the risk of loss. Disadvantages, well, you're working with somebody. Doesn't always work as far as a relationship. One method is if you want to get into another market, and we're on slide 22, is you simply buy out some other local business. At some point, you may want to bring over your goods and services, or you could just buy out the other one just to have international exposure. Then there are companies that just are very big and worldwide. That would get back to Coca-Cola and other companies that have international names. Next slide. Just quickly look on the left. Don't look over the right. Focus on the left side of the slide, slide 23. Look at the names and try and figure out where they're at. And if you're from the United States, you recognize Walmart. They do most of their business in the U.S. State grid. That one is so generic it's difficult to tell. BP stands for British Petroleum. Amazon, Toyota. You may know all those names, but it's a little interesting. All right, now that we have these names, where are these companies? I'll give you a couple of seconds to get started. Excuse me. Mack Trucks. Any guesses? Show of hands. That is a Sweden origination. Bic Pens, France. Grey Goose, the United States. I thought that was somewhere else. Nokia, Finland. Nestle, Switzerland as far as chocolate. Nintendo, Japan. Hyundai, South Korea. Adidas is a German company. Heineken, Netherlands. Doc Martin Boots, United Kingdom. All right. Hopefully by now you see that, hey, going international, if you're a big company, not a bad way to go. However, you are going to run into a couple of issues. First one, might be some countries just don't want you coming in. They'll sell you all their stuff, but they don't want you to come in and take part of their market. One way to slow that down or eliminate it is to put a tax on it. If the tax is high enough, the other country will not do business in the host country because it will simply cost too much. The other extreme is when a country wants to get into a new marketplace, and they're selling it at below manufactured cost, better known as dumping. Usually it's a company with deep pockets, or it's a government that wants to do this. Once the local or host country's resources can't keep up, the business is gone, and then you can raise the price back up. There are other ways to slow this down and not related to actually putting on a high tariff. The quota is a pretty quick and easy one. You can only bring in so many units, so many widgets can come in. You can just halt it all together. You can do other things to actually increase or decrease the value of your currency. And you can go look online. There are some very interesting videos that talk about that. If your currency loses or starts to devalue, meaning the trade value, and that your country's currency doesn't buy as much in the other country, they're probably not going to want to do that. There's a lot of old economic lore about China devaluing their currency to keep it below the United States dollar, keeping the yuan below that. So when you're doing the currency exchange thing, you take the US dollar, it's worth more, you can go buy more Chinese goods. But it works the other way. Your Chinese dollar doesn't stretch that far in the United States, so you're not as interested in buying a lot of US-made goods. Now, why in the world would you be so unfriendly? Well, there are a couple of reasons. We're on slide 28. Pages 82 and 83. Well, you're trying to protect the local market. You're trying to protect local small jobs. That's a good way to keep everyone in your particular region happy. You don't need any civil upheaval. You don't want any domestic problems, so yeah, let's keep out the bad foreigners. The reason you may not want to do it is, usually if it's cheaper to get it somewhere else, that means the price to produce it locally is too high. You also limit the ability to get items that you probably couldn't get. Again, the idea of pineapples, they don't grow everywhere, so it might be a good idea, especially if there isn't a local market to compete, hey, let the pineapples flow freely. And that last one on the right side, loss of jobs. Nothing makes the general population angrier than loss of employment. Should tariffs be used to reduce the country's debt? It's a very good question, and it may not work out the way you're thinking. What are the challenges that are being faced as far as doing international business? We're on page 84, slide 30. Just the cultural difference, the currency difference, the political upheaval, a lot of things come into play. And this is what we'll briefly talk about. The political upheaval, they simply may not like foreigners. Nothing you could say, but they don't fit the particular mold of our local economy and our local culture, and et cetera, et cetera. The political and cultural things tend to work together. Laws generally are supposed to be based on fact, but laws, a lot of laws, you take a little business law, are simply from cultural standards that have been there forever. So there may be something that is a legal act in another country, but it generally stems from a lot of tradition. And if it's completely different, then you probably don't want to have that business. Is the strength of the US dollar good or bad? Again, depends. No clean, quick answer. It is extremely complicated and something that has to be thought of a little later. International trade. How do we get there? On page 86 and 87. Well, a little after World War II, in order to make things a little easier and to get all of these nations on the same page, a lot of countries got together after World War II and decided to come up with a organization to eliminate a lot of trade barriers. Once you start intertwining markets, it's a little harder to get into wars, I'll put it politely, or any type of conflicts. Well, as you can see, GATT morphed into the World Trade Organization for you business majors out there. Everyone gets involved. Any members, if they have a dispute, they go to the WTO to try to settle it. Consider it the Economic Court of Nations. Trading communities. A lot of people get into agreements to make it easy to go between United States, Mexico, and Canada. That was called NAFTA. It was called the North American Free Trade Agreement. I mean, I prefer that one personally just because it rolls off the tongue a little easier than USMCA. European Union, that is most of what we considered more capitalistic European countries. As you can see, other nations followed NAFTA. Now you have CAFTA, ASEAN, Commerce on the Independent, and so forth and so on. All of these are just some working of a free trade agreement so they can all benefit. And they're doing this because they see other countries doing it, and it strengthens their ties, and it makes them a bigger commodity as a whole, strengthen numbers and those type of things. What you're looking at is slowly how we got into the European Union. Oh, the caffeine is not kicking in. And if you will notice, those grayish areas are not involved. And there's also countries that are participating in NATO. Most of those are NATO nations. The outlier is the United Kingdom, which left the European Union. And there's a lot of stuff online. Look at a couple of YouTube videos, whether or not that is a success or not. That is a huge debate. And whether or not the United Kingdom might go back to the European Union. Now, that's going to be entertaining. Back to working groups and whether or not you think these are interesting. If you're a business major, these are interesting things to know. All right. Last tidbit. If you are a business and you wish to actually expand, and you're based in the United States, this might be going out to other places. These are resources that you can go to try to get into the international business realm. Financing. There are places that will actually help you with that as well. In the U.S. and most developed nations, they try to help small businesses get into other markets. On a larger scale, again, to keep things from pretty much exploding or imploding might be a better way, things like the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank are there to help nations actually thrive. Not so much small businesses, but developing countries. This way you don't have humanitarian issues. This way they become great trading partners, etc., etc. Just trying to make the world a little better. Member nations put in and they loan money to other areas. Those who know about this and done a little research, you'll say, well, it has its strengths and weaknesses. Realistically, You're supposed to look at the whole, and as a whole, you want to make sure those developing nations flourish. You eliminate, again, things like poverty and upheaval and humanitarian issues, things that you're trying to gain: schools, clean water, no more starvation on a large scale, those type of things. So it's a noble cause. And we are on page 91, slide 44. And the aforementioned International Monetary Fund, again, trying to give money to developing nations so they can expand and become stable and be ready to do more trading and promote all those wonderful things that we're always talking about. Idealistically, it was created to one day be in a position where it's no longer needed. Okay, that is about it. Not too bad, not too bad. Hopefully you found that interesting. Again, any questions or comments, please feel free to like, share, put comments on the bottom and things of that nature. All right then, hopefully you enjoyed it. Remember, happy studying, and I'll see you in the next one.